My name's Gary. I'm one of the directors at Kids Industries. I've worked with kids for 35 years, which makes me a lot older than I think I am. And 25 of those I've worked in this wonderful space. And the thing I think I know about this audience, because we also work with FMCG and hospitality and those terrible people in licensing. Anybody from licensing here? No, see. The thing I think I know about this audience is of all of those 4 different industries that we work in, you lot care the most. And actually, it's us lot, let's say, that sometimes get pilloried as well. So I think that's really interesting before we've even got started, because what we want to ask you to do today is be a little bit more involved in this conversation. About halfway through our session, we're going to put the lights up. I'm going to ask you what you think about some things. We've got to answer this question of what we mean by value. And that's a really sort of impossible question, really, isn't it? Let's do a little quick straw poll now. Put your hands up if you make value for children's media. Those of you that haven't, you need to take a good hard look at yourselves. Shout out what value means for me. Just shout. What does value mean?
Nourishment.
Sorry?
Nourishment.
Nourishment? That's Greg.
Impact.
Thinking about his stomach again. What? Come on.
Impact.
Impact. What else?
Entertainment.
Thank you. What else?
Empowering.
Oh, shit. Come on. You get the idea. Look, it's a Promethean task. It's really hard. It's like pushing water uphill while wrestling a pig, only to have to get your refreshment from, I don't know, a hose pipe at the top. It's impossible. It's really, really difficult. But for the next hour and a bit, we're going to try and crack that. And the intent is that we leave here with a pretty clear idea of how we can really delineate what value is, because we're at a bit of a point in our history, aren't we, where what gets surfaced for children in the privacy of their own home, and I think Sonia said something fascinating, I think it was Sonia, who said that personalisation delivers isolation, or maybe it was Matt, I don't know, somebody said it, and I wrote it down, I wasn't looking, I was writing it. It was really clever. And it does. Personalisation can lead to this insular thing, because the child sitting there taking in this stuff from this cathode ray oscilloscope is being given what the streamer or the VSP decides it should get. And there's nothing wrong with that, in theory, except the person that wrote the algorithm doesn't have the collective brains that we do. And that's what this session is about, and that's what I'd ask you, if you could please, to help us get to today. Can you do that?
Yeah.
6 of you will do. Right. Before I invite our esteemed panel, we've got quite a cracking panel to discuss this with. I'm going to ask Tim Burge to come up from Dubit. Tim was doing some qualitative research with some children over the last couple of weeks. He's going to set the tone for what we're going to talk about for the next hour. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, hello everybody. So yeah, basically what we did within the research is spent a little bit of time over the last couple of weeks in Leeds and Bristol, and we had our own little panel of experts basically, and I asked them some of these questions around the ideas of value. And these were the guys that I spoke to. It wasn't a massively exhaustive sample, but it was an opportunity to talk to kids and ask them about what they thought about this. We even set it up like they had a little emblem, there you go, for the House of Commons as well, and basically so that they felt that they were having an opportunity to feed back like the other experts had done, and we showed them a little video at the start and explained that that was going to be their task as well. So it was a pretty interesting set of sessions, and I think the key thing that we were looking at throughout that was to understand this idea of value that Gary was talking about then, but also to interrogate it from the perspective of the children and see what they saw, what they felt was valuable about what they were experiencing from the videos and content that they were interacting with online. So it was about the perception, how they were utilising it and experiencing it as well. And perhaps not kind of surprisingly, sorry, I've got a loud voice, but perhaps it's better on here. So from that perspective, what children played back to us was that they did understand that there were challenges around the content and the ways in which they were being served up this content as well. And they replayed that back quite spontaneously to us. But at the same time, perhaps unsurprisingly, they were very quick to articulate all the benefits and the wonderful value of multi-layered things that they felt that they were getting from the media that they were actually consuming. And at the heart of this was a theme around seeing themselves as having actual control. Now, again, I caveat this with this is obviously the children's perspective, so you can read into that what you can. But what was played back to us within the research was that they felt they did have control, and they felt that they understood that there was something happening at the other side of things that was also influencing that. They weren't naive about it, but at the same time, they did feel control within that process also. So the confirmation that we received was very much in line, I think, with some of the conversations I've heard already this morning. And we had spontaneous mentions of content going down some kind of echo chamber and it even becoming slightly boring after a while. The exposure to that, they've been searching particular things or searching up particular topics, and then if they wanted to actually find something else, it was very difficult. They'd gone down that particular thing, particularly in relation to YouTube, but also with TikTok as well. There was other things mentioned also as frustrations. And the frustrations in that were, things like they'd find a part 2 of something, but they'd never actually find the ending of it. They'd never get to the part 1, and the difficulties of doing that and the resolution of the narrative structure as well. So there were those things. There was things about advertising that I think has been mentioned this morning as well, predictably interspersing between narrative structure and being an issue for them when they were doing this. So an example that they actually gave of something that had been used, this happened in a couple of the paired depth interviews, was a mystery button that exists on Netflix, I believe, for younger children. And that was something that had been pressed and taken them into something unexpected, a new place of a new kind of content. And that was actually seen as a solution for them that could potentially work elsewhere as well. So I think that was fairly in line with a lot of the things that we've heard so far. And this is just an example quote. What we had here, you can see this young lady was saying that she was looking at lots of things related to hair, and then once she'd gone down that and then tried to search for something about gymnastics the next day, it was impossible to get to the information. So it was just a recognition of that kind of on a daily basis. But I guess what we also got was the challenge to some of the things that that I've heard about so far as well. And again, this is just from the guys that I've spoken to. This is their perspective. And I know that in the opening address, personalisation was a thing that came out. And I was really interested in that because I guess what these guys described in relation to the personalisation was also it being a thing that for them was some kind of quality. It was a multi-layered value, helpful in a way as well, and a kind of route to a form of self-discovery, which I will talk more about. And again, this is just, I want to kind of make sure that I'm articulating carefully that this is from their perspective that we're talking from here. So it's specifically about the way that they described the benefits they were getting from this. So the recommendations were kind of deepening these existing interests that they had as well, and supporting taste formation and identity building, and that's what they seem to be describing to us. It was very much about inspiration for this individual development and an exploration of identity. It was about personal tastes and independent of peers and family. And this idea of the isolation part also chimed with me when I'm listening to that, because I guess what they described was something that was a bit multi-layered. You had a situation where they definitely had been learning to go into these individual tunnels of interests and developing that sometimes over years and years, and the ability to do that. But at the same time, there was another layer on top of that were things that were shared with close friends. So we had sometimes best friends in the depths, and there were certain things that they would watch together or with a slightly extended version of their social group. And it was kind of a thing that they knew about. So you've got one layer that's very personal, the next layer that's shared with a few closer friends, and then there was a wider level that was a much more kind of everybody knows about those cultural things as well. So it was nuanced, and they were kind of aware of that. And I guess interlinking with that was a feeling of control, empowerment, and an awareness as well. And it did feel about that amongst the children that we spoke to. Again, I'll caveat that with saying, of course, it was a limited sample. And I think the thing about there's going to be lots of different segments of children with lots of different experiences as well. But for the guys that we spoke to, this was kind of pretty true for them, really. And there's just a few example quotes here, which were the same thing. So Roblox I've heard spoke about as well, but I guess the benefit that was described to this by this young lady here, you know, she's been doing Roblox for a long time, and it's something that she was learning from, educating herself by watching other gamers, and then going away and trying those moves out as well. They were also communicating with each other, these two best friends, via Roblox. So it was shared experiences within that as well. So there was a multitude of things going on, really. This DIY example was a really interesting one. This young fella here, he's up in Leeds, a very clever, creative young man, and he sort of had this revelation about his interest in DIY. And we were like, what do you mean DIY? And he was like, no, because they showed us the actual content they were looking at as well as a pre-task. And so he took us and showed us how he would search for this DIY material. And it really was DIY-based stuff. It wasn't like a kid's version of that. It was proper DIY. And he said that he'd tried out a few different things himself at home and failed with them, but was also learning from that. Now, one of the key revelations I had in that was that his mum was in the room whilst we were doing this interview, and she was fascinated to come over and see what he'd been looking at, because she didn't know. She didn't know exactly. She knew he was doing something to DIY, but then she made the comment within the room, it's incredible what they do, isn't it? It's incredible what they do. But I thought it was really interesting because, again, it shows something about this path that this young man's been on, with this journey of learning about himself, his tastes and what he's into, which has been independent even of the knowledge of his mum, and this was his cousin. She didn't know about it either. So what it's telling is a bit of a nuanced story with this stuff, I guess. And then the education point as well. This is something that came out. When I mentioned the word education, there was a bit of a negative response to that. But then when they were talking about knowledge gathering, it was about self-directed knowledge gathering. You know, examples of things such as a gymnastics class where a young lady said that she had a particular move, that if she knew that she had an issue with a move that she needed to work on, she'd just go home and search it up and then work on it. And this girl was about 12, and I said, well, did somebody tell you to do that? She's like, no, I just did it. I know that's what I need to do. And then she saw another move that she'd seen a friend of hers that was struggling with in the same class, and she'd sent her a link to this particular move for her as well. So there was sharing within that. So this idea of like gathering knowledge as well over time was something that was very prominent within it. And intertwined with that, as you can imagine, was this digital literacy and fluency about the systems that were going on. Very quick to talk about monetization, the structure of how these different things work. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'll leave you to decide. But there's definitely an educational process going on within that as well. And that interrelates with ideas about entrepreneurialism and the function of content overall. The two prongs across this one here are essentially about social connection and cultural fluency. So this was the thing about them having these shared experiences. And there were discussions in the playground about these shared experiences, you know, little groups standing together, talking about things that they'd all watched together. So there were examples of that as well. The other flip side of this was also descriptions of how it could help mental health. I think we heard a bit about that earlier too, and a very emotional description from one of the girls about how, you know, when everything was a bit crazy at home, she could lose herself into some of this content. And some of the guys that they've been watching, some of these creators, they've been watching that stuff for years, like 7-8 years. You know, this Dad versus Girls was one that got mentioned quite a bit. And the connection to that, and it's kind of like this, the solidness of it as well, and the feeling that they got from that connection and watching that family was something that also was reassuring and stabilising in some kind of a way. In terms of the influence of American culture, that was big, to say it quickly. What was being replayed back was all sorts of things, like when a couple of the girls came into the room, they're age 13, I said, what do you like doing outside of work? They said, well, we like hanging out at the mall. To which the mum looked at me and said, I don't know where they've got that from. And then they proceeded to go on and say of all the dominance within YouTube of American culture. A couple of young guys who had the most kind of like local accents in Bristol, it was wonderful. And then telling me that when he watches YouTube, it sounds weird when it's got a British accent on it. But however, when he watches TV, it's the flip side of that. So that dominance of culture was really prominent, and it definitely got played back. Now, for the younger kids, they weren't bothered. It didn't mean anything to them. It was a non-issue. But when we got to age 13, there was some reflection. And it was a reflection of a couple of girls who said, I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. It had set false aspirations to them, thinking that having a swimming pool was a normal thing. And you got the sense that they'd been nagging their mum for years about a swimming pool, and then realised that it wasn't a reality. So of course, when we got to the end of these interviews, we did ask them the question about the Australian media ban, and I think it backs up again a lot of the stuff that I've heard so far. What we got first of all was, oh my God, what a terrible idea. Obviously, most of them had heard that this had happened. They were really fearful about missing out. They weren't sure what they were going to do with their time. But what was also really interesting in pretty much every interview, there was also a sense of understanding. And a sense of kind of, you don't know what those guys have been doing with it over there, do you? And I think what that was revealing was that they've been on a journey. They've been on a journey over however many years. They've been given the keys to these different access to information, and they've had to learn some form of self-regulation. And they understand that this is significant. And with that, you're seeing like a realisation of that journey that they've gone on. So again, it's another question, but what I can tell you is that it seemed like their understanding of it was communicating something that they'd grown, they'd understood what was going on, they'd understood the significance of it. Now, these kids generally had a relatively healthy relationship with this content. I'm sure there'd be many other examples that would be less so, but I think that within that they were able to talk about some of the reasons they thought that it could well have been banned and why that might be a bad thing. So overall, from the children's perspective, what they told us, what it means to them, value in relation to the content that they're consuming via mainly YouTube in this case, TikTok later on. It was about being able to explore their own tastes and interests as they grow and sharing cultural connections with their peers, which they did do on that multi-layered version of how they were interacting with it. It's about enjoying diverse content from creators that they like and feel connected to, some of whom they've had relationships with for years and years and years and years, and really, watched even the quality of that content improve over time. And then finally, it's about this feeling trusted to make their own viewing choices and navigate the positives and negatives of the online world. Thank you. There is a version of that available with the videos as well, so you can hear them saying those things more clearly than perhaps I was trying to do their voices. Okay, thank you.
We have Japhet Asher, who is Director of Polarity Reversal. We have Dr. Claire Essex, Post-Doctoral Research Fellow, Creative Computing Institute, University of the Arts, London. We have Clap, please, come on. We have Natasha Irons MP, Member of Parliament of Croydon East. You went to first, didn't you? And a member of the Parliamentary Culture Sports Select Committee, Maddie Moat, presenter, YouTuber, actor, and of course, last but by no means least, Lucy Murphy. Right. Thank you. It's nice to see you all. Please don't look at you there like that. One thing that you took from Tim's little chat. Let's start with you, Lucy, because you're nearest.
It's two, but it is connected.
No, you're only allowed one. No.
The age of those kids is not the age of the kids' media environment.
That's true.
So just it would have been very different if it had been 5, 6, 7-year-olds answering. And secondly, not one of them is mentioning or talking about what we would call traditional television content that we make.
That's interesting, isn't it?
That's so true.
There we go. Let's come to you, Japhet.
Well, I love the mystery button.
The mystery button
from Netflix because it's about agency and it's about a story. You're making a choice in the user design. You press a button and it takes you somewhere unexpected. And I think the problem, we talked about a lot in the first session, with the endless feed, lack of agency, lack of choice, is the biggest problem we face.
Nickelodeon used to have that, didn't they?
They did.
We had one on
Website,
CBBC back in the day too.
Yeah. Natasha, one thing that you took from Tim's presentation?
I think the first thing is it's always good to censor young people's voices in these kind of conversations. So I'm grateful to have had a little glimpse into that. But I'm struck by the sense of individual taste and choice being, that's a really good thing. when actually we have this sort of collective individualism as adults right now through these sorts of platforms. And is it a good thing to be pushing kids into things so early on in their lives when actually you're just actually trying to work out what you like and what you don't like? And if you're not exposed to a wide range of things, then how do you know what you like? How do you know if you're going to be very good at DIY or actually very good at hair and makeup, and if you're not being shown those things as a young person?
So the importance of plurality, we would say, wouldn't we? Maddie, what was the one thing for you?
I think so often when we talk about children's content and making sure it is safe and of value to children, we talk about restricting it, finding ways to restrict the content and their experience of how they watch it. Actually, that, to me, that presentation just made it very clear that actually the products that platforms are offering for kids are just not good enough. They take away everything that Gen Alpha expect from an internet experience, which is to be able to share things with friends, to be able to comment or show whether they are liking or disliking something. I think that the product just isn't good enough, or it's not made for them. There are restrictions in place that make us as adults feel safe, but not in the way that they want.
So we're not thinking about the audience enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Claire.
Yeah, I thought, well, just from a research perspective, I really loved hearing the idea that they think that narratives are being fragmented when they're watching, and that it's very hard now to piece those together, because in my work that is super interesting about how children learn to follow a narrative. So I thought that, but what I really loved was the idea that they see it as a very self-directed sort of interest, and actually in their lives a lot of that self-direction is actually being taken away over time, and that's maybe one of the things that's of high value to them, is a sensation of that.
The experience of it.
Yeah.
Do you know, just picking up on that, I know we're doing one thing here, but what you've just said is really interesting to me, because those kids were up around 12 in that sort of early tween space. Actually, one of the things that that's the storytelling on across social media is very much about, and this is where the community comes from, that's interesting and of value, is in sharing discoveries and making connections between different pieces of narrative and content. So it's kind of, everything gets nuanced in this space. Yes, there's developmental issues, but there's also intriguing narrative and community issues. And so it's why this work is difficult for us to nail
We're going
down.
to come on to talk a lot about that in a little while. Right, so that was the one thing that our panel took from Tim's good presentation. So let's sort of dig into the weeds a little bit. Natasha, you are a member of the Select Committee for DCMS, and you're looking right now at, okay, what is going on? What is good? What matters? What have you learned so far? Tell us something, reflect something about our world back that you've observed so far in your various researches.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the way this came about is, so the chair of the Culture Media Sport Committee is Dame Caroline Dinage, whose father was the presenter of How, the amazing ITV children's programme when we were growing up. And so she wanted to look at children's TV, but it was myself and other people on that panel who have got young children now who said adding content, because children's TV is not children's TV like we grew up with, and we can't just go down this nostalgic look back of, hey, do you remember when, you know, Saturday morning television was amazing and PJ and Duncan were a thing? That is not what we want to look at now. So what we've learned very quickly is, you know, there is massive disparities in quality of screen time, and I think we can stop pretending we don't know what quality is, because the scientific research backs that up very clearly. As a parent who's had to navigate this, I've got an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old, so this last decade has been quite, and COVID came in and took all the things around, don't go on your screen. It's like, no, please watch your screen. So all that stuff all went away, and over that time, the thing I've, as a parent, said to myself, does it have a beginning, middle and end? I let my kids watch things with beginning, middle and end, and that's pathetic in terms of the restrictions I put on, but actually going into that evidence sessions we've had from people, like, oh no, that makes a lot of sense actually, because it's not an endless stream of content that kind of sits them down. So not all screen time is the same. The funding is fallen out of the market. So to create quality content, we are relying very heavily on the BBC to come up with content that young people, that we think is quality for young people, and that in itself is dangerous, because that pot itself is getting smaller and smaller. And again, you then don't have a lot of diverse voices in what we deem as quality. When I was growing up, Channel 4 had loads of children's content that I remembered and really reflected my life as a young South Londoner. And we've got massive issues around prominence on these platforms and how we surface good quality content. So all of those things have come out very quickly at the kind of top line before we've even really dug into anything. And what I would say is that it is going to be up to government, especially at the moment where we're talking about the consultation on screen time, the consultation on social media. What I'm trying to push for is to ensure that the content is part of that discussion, because we have to come back to not all screen time is equal. It is, Frank Cottrell-Voice, the children's laureate, came to one of our sessions and described some of those like endless content streams as not entertainment but sedation. So you can either go for engagement through attention or engagement through comprehension. And we know that's where the quality actually sits, engagement through comprehension. And if we're sedating our children with content, it is not good enough. So I'd like to see that as part of the government's consultation into screen time and how we advise parents on what they're letting their kids see.
I've got to say, I'm quite heartened to hear you say all of that. I think that's bang on.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay, great. I'm not home now.
We can go. Brilliant. Okay, great. So somebody's on our side for once. That's good, isn't it? That's good. Hey.
I'm not the Secretary of State, just to put it out.
You are now. Maddie, let's turn to you. You inhabit a very different position. I know actually you gave evidence to the committee, didn't you? I watched it. You were very good. So it says here in the notes that Colin's given me that your science videos have been viewed 90 million times.
Have they?
Yeah,
Wow.
apparently. And obviously you won a BAFTA, you did the CBeebies stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say is value? Because your career straddles, the last decade. I'm not suggesting how old you are, by the way.
Yeah.
But in the last decade, you've done both of those pillars of content that we currently have.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
I think it's one thing to look at a piece of content and be able to decide whether you feel that is a piece of quality content or not, or a piece of content that is of high value. And I don't want to preach to the choir again. I think most people in here would be able to recognise what they feel that is. But something I think is important to realise is that actually the value in a piece of content comes before and after as well. I think the way a piece of content is produced, the way it's considered, researched, written, and also the aftercare that comes after a piece of content has been made public it adds to the value of it. It's very easy to, let's say, ask AI to make an animation of diverse characters that might be about a scientific subject, but what's to say the educational value, what's to say it's correct, and who's to say it just gets put online and then nobody's monitoring it forevermore? There might be inaccuracies, there might be something that's wrong with it, but if it's just put out there and then no one's there to look after and care for it, then I think that reduces the value. So I think the value, especially in children's content, you have to consider the beginning, the middle and the end of the life of that piece.
Funny that. So craft
Massively
is what
so.
I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, and aftercare is what I would call it, but
Yeah.
which is a made-up word. But.
Claire, your team is doing some quite stunning work, particularly with 3 to 6 year olds, so different from that cohort that Tim told us about. And you're focusing on what is age appropriate and what age appropriateness means and all of that kind of thing. So what is a positive media experience for those preschoolers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as you will all know, is a very tricky question to answer. In our research, where we come at it from is not really about, there's obviously very good age rating systems and all of those things, but what we're interested in is, can the content meet the child where the child's at in terms of their developing minds, and can it then sort of enable them to go further? So that's what we're trying to do in the research that we do. And what we know scientifically is that for young children, so my work is focused from toddlers upwards, and at the minute we're working with 3 to 6 year olds, is we know that understanding screen media is not that easy for them. So they have to learn that. And really good pieces of content are going to scaffold children as they're watching it. And so that's kind of what I mean by seeing them where they're at and meeting them there, and you find a really good spot. And so for young children, a valuable media experience is one that does that, I believe. Yeah.
You said scientifically. How scientifically? What do you mean? Are you sticking probes on babies' heads?
In a much nicer fashion than that, yes.
A little hat.
So we use various ways to understand, get objective measures, what we would call objective measures. So, for example, in my work, I've used eye tracking a lot. So we ask scientific questions. We ask children to sit in front of something called an eye tracker, which just looks like a TV screen, and they sit there and they watch content, and we answer questions based on how their eyes behave when they're watching it. There's other things that we do in the project that we're doing at the minute, which uses a kind of technology that basically puts infrared light through the scalp of the brain. And by doing that, you're able to measure their responses in real time to what they're viewing. So one of our things that we're interested in is how potentially different content varies in terms of the processing demands that are placed on the viewer, and that is a really important thing to understand. And so one of the ways we can do that is to use technology like that to look at the moment-to-moment responses. So that's what we're doing.
People, our audience will be able to read your research as it's published. Okay,
yes,
great.
Exactly.
Lucy, let me come to you. So as Commissioner for Sky Kids for 6-7 years? 10?
Yeah.
I nearly swore then. You had to assess what high-value content was every time you either commissioned or took a pitch or whatever else. How did you go about it? What does that mean to you as a commissioner?
I think the value framework is very layered and complex and nuanced, because you're looking at different cohorts of audience. Of course, you're looking at the novelty, the creativity, the integrity of the project, but then there are layers beneath that in terms of not only the child audience, but the adults that look after them, because you want the child to look at it, but you also want the adults not to be going on mum's net going, oh God, I can't bear my child watching this show. It happens. Then there's all the compliance sort of values, and the values that a platform puts on itself in terms of diversity, sustainability, technical excellence, etc. But the interesting ones, and the ones that are always the sort of most discussion, is, is there a community around this idea? And that, what you were talking about the before and after, that's really interesting to me. If you look at a show, when Pablo was made by the BBC or Ready Eddie by Sky, there was a community there that were crying out. They were neglected voices. There were representation that wasn't on screen. So that was something that could be and should be considered. And
just go into that just a second. So you talk about novelty, and I'm not suggesting that those shows are novelties, but they aren't novel in as much as nobody had done them. How did you get to that point where you thought, actually, representation isn't happening here? Did you know that before the show was pitched to you, or was the show pitched and you went,
there's a lot of commissioners here. A lot of, part of the commissioning job is to know everything about what's out there.
So it's very qualitative.
Yes.
A lot of it's in your head.
It is. It's, where are the gaps? What are those neglected voices or experiences? And how can it be done differently? And from a sort of adult perspective, that community around, for younger children, adults and parents do spend time talking about what their kids watch and why. And for the older children, they want to be standing in the playground talking about what they've watched. So that kind of halo of the onward journey of a piece of content, what happens next? Does it lead to an activity? Does it lead to a science experiment? Does it lead to a picture going up on the fridge? Does it lead to seeing your child play Peppa Pig with their stuffed toys? All of those things are value. But it's not necessarily. It's embedded in the content because it has to be good content to engender that forward journey.
But it's also down to the rigour and the skill of people like you or whoever else is in the audience that's commissioning. It's also your teams that look at content, so on and so forth. It's not been codified anywhere, has it, really?
No, but there are a lot of those sort of stages that commissioners would go through. It's a very robust process. And it has to be because there are so many ideas.
So the ability to evaluate value is definitely within the industry. There's no question about that, and it exists. So, Japhet, yeah. So you've been doing a lot of work with Children's Media Foundation and others within the group. Can you tell us a little bit about that work you've been doing? Because I think that bounces from what Lucy's saying very well.
Sure. I mean, let me start from where we started.
We could be here for a while.
Sorry, folks. I will say these are the most comfortable panel chairs. And I'm settling in. Right? They're very good. You know, Greg, along with Frank Cottrell-Boyce, appeared in front of the committee at the very beginning of the hearings, and amongst the things that were asked of Greg were, well, if you want us to regulate for good, for quality, how do we know what that is? And then there was also a discussion of whether technology, particularly AI, could potentially help with that identification. Now, that happens to dovetail with some conversations that Mark Goodchild, Greg, Colin, and I, and others at CMF had been having about ways we could move the conversation on. So it sort of sent us into, let's try and think this through. What could a children's media quality framework look like? And of course, immediately...
Hang on a second, let's just get clear. That's distinct from what Lucy was talking about.
Well, it is. It's distinct from it, but it obviously builds on it. Because ultimately, it's going to build on the expertise of everybody here, all the stakeholders who have been focused on children and their media behaviours, and children themselves and parents. So that's a very big ask. It's a very big task. So we started to think through what that might look like, looking at various categories and how you would start to enumerate these things. Because if your goal is to affect the algorithm, to change the way that we are served content, you have to think in terms that are quite binary and tight. So we came up with a straw man of 64 different attributes after some discussion, exploration in areas like craft, like diversity and representation, like educational value, like mental health. I don't want to go through all of them.
And did you conjugate these? Were they grouped, or were they just 64?
They were like 8 different themes, and within them, because who doesn't love, the symmetry of maths, 8 attributes. But honestly, we don't know if these are right at all. This is a starting point. Some of these we'll find that we can't agree on when we start to try and look at content. We have to remember that there's huge ranges of content that we have to deal with. Watching the presentation earlier, I mean, that DIY information was lovely, right? So you need something that's going to judge preschool content for 14-year-olds, stuff made in garages by guys doing DIY projects that's great, and that we would consider of high value because it's hitting a number of the attributes. So, we've got to think in a very broad terms about different age groups, different genres, some things that we might consider to be not that well made, but they super serve a particular niche audience that really needs that content. So there's a lot to consider. So we're taking a start at this and trying to put together what that framework could look like based around personal value and also social values.
So this is in a specific response to the Select Committee's ask of what does value mean? Because if we're going to serve up quality, we need to know how to define quality, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Natasha, what would be is that going to be helpful? Is that going to help you in your journey of helping us?
I think any guidance from the industry is a helpful place to start. I think, I understand the business model and the sort of aspirations of a platform like YouTube, which is to democratize content creation in some ways, but it also monetizes the type of content that is very quick, very disposable, and very, sort of not necessarily has much value in terms of development. And that's fine if you're not talking about children under the age of 18. Like if you're talking about people whose brains are still developing, that's not okay.
Yep.
So I think a framework around what value means would be helpful in terms of how you would then, because obviously YouTube will tell us that they've got this framework in place anyway, and that yeah, okay. But, you know, in terms of legislation, what we do in that space, I think, this is why I think the consultation the government's currently running is very key, and why I would like to see content put into it, because actually standing back and just going, you know, if this was a TV channel and we were applying the same standards we would for Ofcom, and we were applying the same sort of measures, would we think this is okay? They are editorialising the content because the algorithm's editorialising the content and deciding as and when kids what they see. So I think it's a good place to start, and I hope that we can try and get this into the consultation so that it makes the government think, do we need to step in here and enforce this and treat video streaming platforms differently to how we would treat social media, because they are different. They're serving different purposes, I would argue. Yes, you can comment on videos. I think the point was made earlier, but a video streaming platform is not TikTok, and it is, I mean, sorry, it's TikTok, but it's not like Twitter, and it's not Facebook. It is a different sort of thing. You're having a very different sort of experience. And its impact on a young person is very different.
Japhet?
Well, just to build on what you said, I think it's really, you know, these big platforms, some folk may know I spent the last couple of years working in one of these big tech environments, and the volume of content that goes through is insane. And they do argue that they catch some 90% plus of the problem. The problem is that, you know, that 5% they don't catch is a massive amount of content, and they need to do better. Most of their efforts focused on machine learning and focused on sifting out things that are illegal, genuinely harmful in ways that are already regulated. But they don't focus on good in any way other than engagement. And, you know, we've heard today about engagement, consumption versus agency already. So our focus with the work around good is very much about creating a data set, collecting the knowledge of our community, to evaluate what good is and to share that so that potentially a YouTube could use it with their algorithm. I mean, we'll explore whether we can impact train machines around it, but really we need them to do this.
Okay, hang on, I'm going to come to your audience in a second. I don't want to sit with you, Natasha, but there's something you just made me think. So supposing collective we were able to really define what value is, could that then be built into legislation, regulation?
I don't know. We'd have to ask the government. I think I would say we're in a particularly interesting period of time, and we're at a crossroads because we're trying to define. I mean, if you caught the news today, the Prime Minister, along with Liz Kendall, have been talking about being far more proactive and far more flexible in how we, you know, we talked about the online safety act taking far too long and being far too clunky and not being able to be reactive to things like AI and things like that. So they're having those discussions about how we can be much more responsive to the real world rather than, you know, retrospectively putting in these laws and trying to be proactive. I don't see why we can't have that conversation around content. I guess the challenge is that no government should be telling people what they should be watching. I think we like this and that we think this is good and that's bad, as in terms of taste. Yep. But I think there is something around, especially when it comes to young people's content. Like I was using this example. If I went and bought toys for my child, the materials by which those toys were made would not be toxic because we have legislated to ensure that the ingredients are not going to kill my kid. Okay. When you're a parent and you're allowing them to watch content, you're doing that in good faith that the platform you're putting them on is going to ensure that content is safe and good for them. So I think we should be putting be far better on the framework of what goes into that content, what's the ingredients in that content, rather than having a judgment on that's good, that's bad, I like this made me laugh, that didn't make me laugh, because we're not the sort of like Caesars sitting in a kind of like thing, like good, bad, bad. But we should be thinking about what is going into the ingredients of this piece of content that makes it good or bad for kids.
Maddie?
I think it's definitely moving in the right direction to have some sort of framework which could offer creators a kite mark, which could give their content value, or it could be a signifier to parents, to educators, that this content has met certain standards. But obviously I'm naturally wary of any sort of AI framework measuring or assessing content. At the moment, I know it's in its really, really early stages, but as a very small independent content creator, I do think, how would my content measure up against, let's say, something that has been produced by a big team from the BBC or Sky? How is this AI model being trained, and will that be fair?
Well, I think the intent will be that that's the point. The kind of content that we want surface. I was talking to a client last week who makes fantastic content, never gets surfaced. Nobody ever sees it.
Well, that's
a
issue.
really big and important sort of part of this discussion. If YouTube is the number one destination for kids and looking for content, and it is, they go in and they search for something. Now, you can't search for something unless you know what it is. And that might be a theme. It might be hairdressing. It might be DIY. But you can't search for something that you don't know about. And that's where recommendations are so important. And the experience of viewing is so important, because you can't treat every single bit of content the same. Those kids really know what they want. They don't want to be interrupted by ads. They don't want to be searching up for, part 5 of something that they've watched out of order, because that's not the way it's being presented. The viewing experience is really, really important. But coming across content types that they don't know about it's the part of what a channel used to do, because you could hammock a new piece of content in between two favourites and hope that you'd hold on to your audience. But when the child is in charge of that search,
you're just going to go to what they know.
So the recommendations and what the algorithm throws up is of fundamental importance.
Claire?
Sorry.
So we think about that notion that kids like familiarity, right? They go back. We've all had it with our own kids, whatever. We'll watch the same film 15 times. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel secure, right?
Yeah.
Therein lies a bit of a problem, doesn't it, to what Lucy's speaking about? Are you navigating that in your research, or is that not relevant?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very true that children like familiarity and repetition, because, like I said before, they're building skills in order to process what they're seeing. And ultimately, the more times they see it, the easier it becomes to process it. And there's something nice about that. But I also think, which was in the research at the beginning, there also, as they get older, there becomes a frustration in that, because they're aware that they're being funneled in a direction and then it won't broaden out. So I think that what Lucy is suggesting is you have to be able to, there has to be some kind of anchor in there that means that it can still broaden. And that one of the downsides for children is a narrowing, and then they get sort of stuck in a place that
we don't want. Okay. Okay.
I would say.
Right. So, just to turn to you lovely people for a minute, if I may. Has anybody got an immediate question? We're having another few questions with a panel after. Is there any immediate questions, or look at your notes? Is there something on your notes that you're thinking about? You thought, oh, that's interesting. There's a lady there in green, I think. There's a microphone just coming to your right or your left.
Sorry to be first, because I'm not a producer of content, and I value the producers of content very highly. I'm an academic. My name is Maura Messenger-Davis. But in terms of this issue of what is quality, there's a bit of reinventing the wheel that perhaps should be avoided. And the institution that came to my mind on this is the Prix Jeunesse. I've recently done a review of their publications on quality, and they're industry-based as well as education-based and academic-based. And there's an enormous amount of information out there. I don't know if the Select Committee has been in touch with the Prix Jeunesse people, but I would suggest that they are very, very useful, and their back catalogue is extremely useful. And I imagine that some of the people here have actually been involved with the Prix Jeunesse. But I just want to say one other thing quickly. In terms of individualised experience, it made me think of when I was a child and people got told off for always having their nose in a book. Because if you are reading, you are on your own. You're in there in this world that your parents aren't sharing, that nobody else is sharing. Yeah. And now, of course, reading is something that we valorise. Yeah. And I've always thought it was very unfair that literature and literacy gets valorised and everybody's in favour of reading, and good telly has not been praised in the same way. So that was my main point.
Very well, Mike, thank you. Love that. Yes, there is somebody here from the Pre-Jeunesse. Mr. Kleeman, put your hand up. Natasha, that's David Kleeman.
All right.
David, will you write to Natasha, please?
If you write to the clerks of the committee, they would be the ones who'd put you on the list of people to come in. Yeah, but I think what I was going to come back and say is, I agree. There is, and I made this point earlier around how do we decide what's good. There's plenty of research to determine what is good for childhood development, and that's not new. And we've all been talking about that for many years. All that's changed is the technology. And the basic principles are still the same. You need slow, repetitious stuff that is designed to help young people's brains develop. That is no different. I think the difference is the technology and the way that these platforms monetize attention and for engagement rather than comprehension for engagement.
The technology is anything that is invented after you were born. Who said that? Who said it's okay? Said that? Yeah.
Well, can I add something quickly to that?
Yes.
The Pre-Jeunesse point's a great point, and we're sure all of us here admire the Pre-Jeunesse, but that also recognising a very, very high bar of quality. Mm-hmm. And we need to recognise that there's also an important piece of work in just raising the level of good.
No small parts, only small actors. David, can you just comment on what you've heard from your perspective, because and maybe allude to the work that Sherry Hope Culver's done as well. Can we get a microphone to David here, please, in the blue, wearing his Pre-Jeunesse tracksuit, I think, actually.
I always love hearing the Pre-Jeunesse brought up. I will put a little bit of a damper on it in that there's a big difference between rating the everyday content that young people consume and create and a competition or festival in which you're seeking to choose the best of the best and you have a certain number of awards that can be given, and below that things may be outstanding. I just did the Pre-Jeunesse nominating jury, and we had almost 400 programs that we had to reduce to 60. So there's a lot of outstanding content out there.
Why is that a dampener? That's a good thing, isn't it?
It's a good thing, except for trying to build a framework for what young people watch and consume every day.
Okay.
But I guess you're saying that not everything has to be award-winning content for it to be
That's
good.
right.
And I think that's the point.
Yeah.
But there does need to be a flaw by which it doesn't go blah blah. But just, if you went out there and said everything has to won a BAFTA, that wouldn't work either.
There's a gentleman with his hand up with the glasses.
Hi, I'm Paul Nahar-Biswas. I chaired one of these sessions at the last one a couple of years ago. One of the questions I've got is, we talk a lot about good, and we talk a lot about good ingredients, and we talk a lot about, sort of things that have positive value, and I'm a big believer in the positive value bit. The question I've got is that, shouldn't we be talking about diet? Because if I offered to my children the chance to go and have some, lovely homemade ice cream, or they can have some terrible fish fingers, or they can have some frozen veg or whatever, they will pick my frozen ice cream every single day. But they can't live on ice cream. And so we do need a diet of things. And the problem that we've got in an on-demand world, which is not reaggregated on demand, but just purely on demand, is people do hone down into different spheres, and we don't give them that balance that is really needed. All of us over here, Maddie, do you know is actually, I actually sing in my head, do you know, because I've watched it so many times from my kids. And what was interesting is that when they were young, we had this plurality of content because they were plonked in front of, sort of CBeebies, etc. But what I do worry about is how, in an on-demand environment, do we ensure that diet happens? It doesn't have to be the best diet, but it needs to be diet, and that's a range of different things.
That's entirely right.
It's true. It's so frustrating that we don't have someone from who designs these products for the platforms here, because ultimately I think a lot of what we want to see change is the way children are consuming the content and the way the good quality content that is surfaced. And actually, none of us can do that.
I think they were asked.
I know. I'm not saying it's through lack of effort. Like, I appreciate that.
But the kind of the small sample of research that we saw this today, even young people themselves saying, "I'm getting bored of seeing the same thing over and over again," and the mystery button on Netflix, which my kids love, is a pushback to that, because there is an acknowledgement that yes, you go down one wormhole, it gets extremely boring. And as I said before, these algorithms do editorialise this content. So there could be a function of that to ensure that there is a wide range of content that is shown to young people.
Got 2 more questions, 3 more questions. What, this is good, lots of hands, I love it. Mr. Is that Mark in the Good Child? Thank you.
I think what you just started touching on is the curatorial nature. And when we were talking to Lucy about this for the framework, we were going like, we've got a lot of great commissioners in this room who will hopefully feed into this framework, but we can't scale them, without using some technology, because it's just the amount of content out there. But the bit that seems to have been missing, and I think even the kids sort of probably miss it, these kids were touching on it. I think last year's Ofcom research showed that kids are aware that they are being curated that diet by an algorithm that no one understands. YouTube don't understand it. When I was working at Warner Cartoon Network, we used to have conversations with them. They were quite public that they didn't really understand how the algorithm worked as long as it delivered the attention and the monetization. I think, Lucy, you've been in the same conversation. So for us, I think this value, coming up with a value framework, which hopefully brings the century of children's media interests in the UK that we have, experience, plus the new creators, plus kids' voices, and plus parents, gives us a few more signals that we can start to say, you don't understand your algorithm, start using these signals. At least it's got to be better at curating that diet. And that's why we would ask, people to get involved rather than, because that's the only way we can actually work out whether tech can improve this diet.
I'd love that to work. It's interesting because obviously YouTube, for example, we're all talking about YouTube, is such an international platform, and we are so overwhelmed in terms of content coming from the UK by content coming from the US. If we were to create some sort of value framework and insist it had to be used if you were uploading content that was, let's say, made for kids, to use YouTube's language, how would that then prioritise that in an ideal world and surface it above other content that hasn't gone through the same checks and measures? Sorry.
Just before you respond, Mark, so indigenousness would be important as one of these values?
Well, I think
we've got to reflect the children's
for
own
public
culture.
service, absolutely. I think it's important that children are seeing themselves reflected.
Yeah.
I think it would be great for children to see themselves in the content that they're being served more. If all they're watching are children from America, that's not necessarily them seeing themselves represented. So I do think that that's important, definitely.
And there have been a few occasions when the algorithm has been tweaked, when the advertisers were running scared because they knew content was radicalising kids and the advertisers didn't want to be associated with it. Within a week, they fixed that problem. So it can be done. You just need to have enough emphasis. And absolutely, indigenousness, seeing local voices represented is something part of the framework. We haven't got it all right yet, but there's definitely lots of different things. If we value it, well, you need to find those signals and then push back on the platforms to say, start using this.
OK, so I'm going to say this now, and I'll come back to it later. Colin Ward kindly offered up his email address to anybody. There he is there, and I will get the email address in a moment, or maybe we'll send it out to the list. Maybe that's the way to do it. If you are interested in supporting this investigation, development of this framework, and really defining what value and quality is, please email Colin, and he's promised me, because we had this conversation on Friday, and he said, yeah, no, I'll do it. I said, you'll get 200 emails. He said, no, that's fine. So please let's make him get 200 emails that we all contribute to what this thing looks like. Will you do that? 3 of you will. OK, so you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine.
I can handle that.
Yeah, I think we are all going to do it. OK, I think it's important. Right, I'm going to take one more question from the audience then. There's a gentleman up there with a lanyard. Yes.
Hi. Oh, good, I'm coming through. Hi, Jason Nellis, American, so first, sorry.
That's 2 Americans.
I mean, I'm just apologizing on behalf of all Americans at this point.
And so you should.
Seems only fair at this point. So I was part of the team at Meta that built live shopping for Facebook. I was part of the Moonshot factory there. Spent a lot of time on the product side. And as somebody who's really been a children's media fan since my time at university, I can say first and foremost, I really applaud what all of you do in this room, and I really wish that there was a way that I could tell you from the inside how to move the needle with platforms like that, because unfortunately, it all comes down to money. I mean, I worked on a platform that I was really involved with on the creator monetization side, and until I could show that it was a total addressable market of at least $1 billion, nobody would pay attention to it. And so until you can move the needle on the monetization side, and until you can either, as the gentleman was talking about before, you have a moment of an adpocalypse where suddenly advertisers are running away in droves, not willing to put their money down because they're afraid of being put side by side with Nazis, you're not going to be able to make that movement. So unfortunately, it's either going to take massive amounts of legislation or huge money moving in a different direction to affect the people at the very top. And I truly mean, like, Mark Zuckerberg has to make the decision before anything waterfalls at Meta. On the flip side, and I want to commend Maddie and others like her for doing this, I've watched over the last 10 or 15 years content creators who have improved the quality of their content, not just from production, but the messages that are being delivered, the way in which they're working with their audiences, and really delivering messages that are very cognizant of what you're all speaking to. So I do see from my vantage point also a bit of an audience and creator-driven movement that I hope to see more of a tsunami in the next few years of that side of things helping to drive platforms to say, we really need to be doing better because our own content creators on whom we depend are really moving the needle too, and we need to be following them rather than trying to direct them in other directions.
Yeah, I totally agree, because there definitely are content creators like myself out there who are really, really trying. But I mean, Lucy mentioned it. The issue is just discoverability. I could make, I could put as much time and energy and no budget into a video as I possibly can, but I cannot compete with Mr. Beast. I just can't, especially for the age range that I'm going for. By the time, I'm making content for 6 to 8 year olds, but I've already lost them to the creators I cannot compete with.
I think that's the benefit of something like a Kite Mark or that sort of. You're absolutely right. Of course, so that these platforms need to make money. They're businesses. They're not public service broadcasters, and we can't pretend they're in it for anything other than monetary gain. That's their job. But actually, as parents who are consumers, who are then making those decisions about what we invest in, allow our kids to watch, a Kite Mark and a raising of awareness that we have in the UK right now, an opportunity in a moment to raise awareness about what is on these screens. A Kite Mark allows parents to make those decisions, and once parents decide they're not spending their money on something, that herd moves together. So I think we're in a key sort of opportunity here.
Just a thought. It would be good if we could also make this Kite Mark a bit cool, because I feel like make the Kite Mark a bit cool. Because I feel like cool, yeah. Because I just feel like we go, oh, let's Kite Mark, or say, oh, this gets a tick of approval. It feels very educational. It feels very parental driven. I think children also need a reason to watch and search content that has whatever this mark is. If there could be some sort of reward or gamification behind watching content that has this seal of approval, that even your 13, 14-year-olds can get on board with, that would be really helpful. It's different at preschool, the parents are a bit more involved, but later on, like, who wants to watch a Kite Marks programme that your parents are sitting
through? And I think that's true, because actually the BBC could be seen as a Kite Mark, that public service values. I've been in research sessions talking to kids who don't recognise the BBC logo. They just don't. They know the show they like, but they don't recognise the logo. So Kite Mark is problematic for that very reason. It's not cool and it's not recognised. Can I just pick up on something you said in terms of, YouTube isn't a public service broadcaster? Actually, they kind of are, because any content strategy now means making your show available on YouTube. If you're looking to fund second, third seasons, people want to see value expressed as, well, how many views does it get on YouTube? That's quite outside how on earth do you tell what viewing is if you don't know if someone's in Korea or Germany or the UK. But there is a lot of really, really good content on YouTube, because that is part of today's content strategy.
Right, I've got to wrangle this back now. So we've got another question to it. No.
Yes, please. I just want to say...
No.
I know. No. I'm going to say it anyway. You know I am.
Fight.
Kite Marks, I personally don't think Kite Marks are the solution, just to be clear.
Something like it.
Because that's why what matters is annotation of content, so that it can be algorithmically discovered and pushed if somebody is asking for that thing.
So it's not chocolate-covered broccoli, it's broccoli they can't see.
Well, they really want to see because they're rewarded for seeing it.
We're not trying to hide the value.
I understand that. I would understand because, like, someone who grew up in the 80s and 90s when they started sticking like explicit content onto CDs, and the first thing you want to do is go and watch and hear that, right? But what that did, as much as yes, I probably heard more swear words than I should have done. What that did though is it at least demarked that as something that actually isn't for me. So I know that perhaps I shouldn't be doing this thing, but I know that it is not for me. So I understand the squeamishness about, but it's not cool and the kids will get around it. But actually, it does set a level, an expectation of behaviour and what is normal, right? So even if you're trying to be a bit naughty and get around it, you're being naughty. It is just not the thing of just what your kids do. So I'm a big fan. And actually, for me, it's more for the parents. It's more for the people. I'm thinking more preschool. I'm thinking more learning that behaviour is this okay for my child? Because again, you're establishing behaviour, you're establishing what is normal and what is expected.
Okay, right. We've got very few minutes left and we've got lots of questions to ask, so I'm going to crack on. No. Claire?
Yes.
We're going to have to keep these answers nice and tight because I do want us to explore them because I want our audience to feel a little bit more informed. Look, you're only halfway through your research. What can it bring? I know I'm asking forward. What will it bring to our ambitions that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I think it actually picks up on lots of things that have been discussed already. We're only looking at one particular type of content. So we're only looking at animated content. But what it's going to be able to do when we get to the end is it is going to be able to tell us quite concretely what it is about the content that children are viewing that means you have different outcomes for them in a very short term, like immediately after viewing. That's what it's going to be able to do. And it's going to be able to distinguish between where a piece of content maybe sits, because maybe for some 3-year-olds, what they would actually better respond to is content that's aged slightly up. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Okay. And we might be able to tell you certain aspects of the content that improve things for children while they're watching them and things to avoid.
Thank you. Maddie, you're a content creator. You've alluded to this sort of, the AI thing. So even if ostensibly this LLM is trained by humans and the collective brain here, what sort of checks and balances would you want to see?
Yeah.
If something like that was to roll out? What would make you feel safe?
I think I would really value something like this to start with, just because because I don't have a huge production team, it would be nice to be able to run my content through a piece of software and I can get assurance to know that I am doing everything I can to create a really balanced, enriching piece of content. So that's something that's really great. Okay. However, AI is only as smart as we can physically make it to be. And just because my content might serve a bunch of checkboxes that equal quality or value, it doesn't necessarily mean that what I am saying is correct. So for me, as someone who makes very obvious educational content, I'm always going to need to run my content through research and people.
So this has got real value for you as an independent person. You're going to be able to amplify.
but it's never going to be. It's never going to provide me everything I need. No.
Okay. Natasha, projects like this are really complex. I'm sorry to keep picking on you, but you're our only hope.
It's all right.
What are the ways that I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the government, or I kind of am. I'm not holding your feet to the fire on it. What can you, government, do to move things like this forward?
I think just take the opportunity right now to speak holistically about digital childhood, right? So instead of just we're going after social media platforms, or we're going after algorithms, or we're going after
There's a lot going on right now, right?
But we have to be ambitious about childhood in general and what that means both in real life and online life, because these two things bleed together. They came up earlier around, we'll get kids off their screens, but then what do we do with them? And I think it's a very, very good point. We have closed over 1,000 children youth centres. There's been £1 billion worth of cuts out of youth funding across the country, and where these spaces in real life in communities have disappeared for young people, they have retreated into their bedrooms and parents have given them things to do on screens because that's safe and that's somewhere for them to be. So there needs to be two things that happen at the same time. If we get kids off screens, but where do we put them? There is the National Youth Strategy that's come out, and that is all around reopening youth centres. It's also around having much better wraparound care for schools, because schools actually can play a massive role in providing community space for young people. That you spend 80% of your time as a young person outside of school. So if we can use the school estate as a footprint across every community, you can give young people safe spaces to be outside of traditional school time as well. So the government is looking at that. In terms of this opportunity with the consultation that's coming up and the action the government is doing, I think that this is our opportunity to try and feed in digital childhood as a holistic sort of ambition and way forward. This is the opportunity to kind of push those things. And as I said earlier, the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State talking about how we make legislation far more flexible and responsive to what is actually happening, rather than spending 7 years talking about an internet that existed 7 years ago, and seeing how we can speed up that legislative process so we can be ahead of the curve rather than behind it.
That's the thing. Lucy, in your years of experience, and you know that I think the telly that you made is always proper kids telly. I just loved.
It wasn't just me.
Well, no, but yes, but you're here. What will this do to enable that to happen? To enable the continuation of what we might call proper kids TV?
Oh, that's such a big conversation, and I know we're going to talk about
30 seconds.
funding later, but I think the funding models are so broken, and the elephant in the room is there is a lot of really good content out there.
Yeah.
There is a lot of really good content. In the world where Bluey exists, you need another preschool juggernaut. You know, it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. But in terms of how do we work and collaborate as an industry across platforms, because we have to consider TikTok, we have to consider YouTube, we have to consider traditional models. That ability to surface quality shows, we know how to make them. We need to be able to work harder to make them discoverable and make them valued financially, because it's very, very hard to make money out of a kids show right now.
So we're going to talk about monetisation this afternoon. Japhet, I've got 30 seconds for you. What can we do? What should we be doing now as a result of this conversation?
I think I was just really hit by what Natasha was just saying about not making the mistake we made with the Online Safety Act of spending so long and focusing so much on what has been and focusing ahead to the future. In this morning's panel, somebody was talking about the problem with parental controls in all kinds of different environments, and I was thinking, if somebody isn't already making an AI agent to have a parent give instructions to that will go to all the platforms and take care of it in one go, they should be. I'll take investors if people are interested. It seems to me that we need to understand how much these tools will shift, and what we can do by making our framework and getting all the data of our shared knowledge about what makes content good together is we can make that a resource, not just for big tech companies, but for parents, for what you do at home with your own machines. It's really important, and I think that's the power of it.
Lucy?
We cannot put it all on the parents for two reasons. I've worked for a tech platform that made brilliant parental controls. Less than 1% used them. Most parents are not going to use parental controls. And secondly, there are so many kids that are not under parental or adult supervision when they are on these platforms. We have to go child first, not parent first.
Agreed.
Yeah. We do. Right, we're going to wrap up there. I was tasked with trying to pull us into a pithy sentence at the end. I've got no bloody idea. What I will say was that I heard self-actualisation of the children a lot. That's clearly a theme. That the care for the craft is really important, that we need to lean on those that can help us develop policy to enact that policy so that the regulator has teeth for a start. Science is helping. Plurality is important, and this isn't isolated to the child's relationship with the screen. It's about all those parts, the village that makes the child. So it's really blooming complex. So you've got to help. Colin's going to send you all an email saying, write to me. You promise, Colin? I promise. So thank you, panel. Thank you very much. It's lunchtime.